How are some players able to breeze through a game in a couple of hours, whilst others struggle to get through just one battle round in the same time? It feels bad and it can impact your games. Nobody wants to lose because of time constraints, so I'm here to help you out. Even if you're someone who doesn't normally struggle with time, this video will challenge how you think about playing 40k. Hello and welcome to Incursion Tactics. This week, I'll be mostly talking about time. In particular, making the most out of the precious time that we have to game. I've played Horde armies for years. Guard, Orcs, Demons, and I even picked up Gene Stealer cults last year. It can be a real challenge to learn a new army when you've got so many models to it. And so I've compiled some tips that are transferable and will help you to play quickly and efficiently no matter what army you play. The last few in particular have been especially game changing. Let's get started. First and foremost, we need to know the rules. The biggest time sink, bar none, that I see in games is because players simply don't know the rules. I'm not saying we've got to sit down, smash through that book cover to cover in one sitting, but just having a solid understanding from the get-go. If that means rereading them from time to time, it's so easy to do, flipping through a couple of pages here and there just to refresh our knowledge and just reduce the amount of time that we waste trying to answer questions that we could have answered prior to playing the game. I promise you, if you were to take the time to do this, you will find something that you didn't realise you didn't know. A few weeks back I was in the Epic Flail Discord, and speaking of Epic Flail, they make some great Warhammer 40k content. Paul streams a regular Meta Monday show as well as battle reports every so often. Last week it was Sisters versus Imperial Guard and it was an awesome battle, very close fought, and some top banter between the players as well. Great fun. All the details can be found in the video description below, along with Mike's return to the Old World channel focusing on Warhammer the Old World, and Wayne and Matt from Board Stupid do some amazing board game reviews. A few weeks back I was in the Epic Flail Discord asking for some opinions on core stratagems for my video that I did on core stratagems. I had some people respond with, "Oh wow, I didn't know that stratagem actually existed." None of us are perfect. We can't absorb every last bit of rule, and if there's a certain thing that exists in the game that you're not aware of, that unfamiliarity with the rules, that is a massive waste of time. In my games, in your games, all the games of 40k around the world. But as I've said, I'm not perfect. Nobody is. It's hard to retain every last thing in the book. But the key thing here is, what can we actually do about that? And just taking some time to give ourselves a little reminder of certain things. I guarantee that everyone here watching this video has an area of the rulebook that they might not be 100% familiar on. If there's something that you can pinpoint, maybe it's the charge phase, maybe it's how terrain works, or swarms. I mean, it blew my mind when I first learnt that Nurglings can't go through walls. I didn't know that until I found it out in a game. And speaking about individual army rules, this also extends to those as well, especially if you're learning something new. Spend some time reading the units, rereading them, memorising strats as best that you can, even scanning through the data sheets that you're going to use just before you play a game. It can be really helpful and make a massive difference to the time spent slowed down double checking things. Think about it as a rehearsal for a play. An actor would do a terrible job if they were struggling to remember their lines. So how on earth can we be expected to play efficiently if we're constantly struggling to remember what our army does? Do your future self a favour, and your opponents, and plan just 5-10 minutes here and there ahead of the game to absorb army rules as best you can. One thing that's caught me out in the past, and as a bonus little tip, is if you've got an army that you're learning for the first time and it's a little bit different to what you're used to playing, try and pinpoint the units that are different. Let's say transports, for example. Say you play Imperial Knights, you don't ever use dedicated transports, and then you go to an army that uses dedicated transports. It would be really worthwhile for you to read about dedicated transports, how they work and what happens when it blows up. I've caught a couple of people off guard now when I've said to them, "I'm sorry, you can't use a stratagem on that unit," essentially battle shock now. They had no idea that getting out of an exploded transport meant that the unit was battle shocked. There's little things like that don't always come up, but when they do, it pauses the game. Let's check, let's get the app, let's get the rulebook. Time is then wasted. So if we realise things ahead of time, we could brush up on those sections of the rules, eradicate this wasted time. Carve out time to digest the rules in a way that works for you. This will help to reduce the biggest contributing factor to games being slowed down. And not only that, makes us a better player because we're literally arming ourselves with a greater depth of knowledge. If you're a newer player, this won't happen overnight. It's a process. Do it in stages, and over time, you'll start to see that the time you spend checking stuff in game will slowly reduce. One extra way to help with this is practicing dice rolls in your spare time. This might sound a bit odd, but say you've got a new army, you're taking it to your club or your game shop for the first time, but you're still absorbing your own army rules. Roll out some of your units shooting or fighting against one of your opponent's units. Work out the number of attacks needed and practice rolling it out. Physically roll the dice, then have a go at the unit if it's at half strength or with a stratagem in effect. Get yourself used to recalling information, counting things out, creating a bit of muscle memory through the physical process of going through the motions. Reading the datasheets is great, but to truly embed a piece of learning, it helps to practice recall and application of knowledge in a specific scenario. And that's what rolling the dice out does. Why practice games are so important. Playing more games will ultimately make you a faster player because of things like this. It's the same principle that you can practice, and it's really helpful for when we're trying to commit unit capabilities to memory. The resultant time save is huge when you instinctively know how many dice are required to resolve your unit's actions in the game without having to refer to a datasheet. So we've covered some foundational things that we can do to make our play a bit more efficient and streamlined. I mentioned earlier in the video some things that were particularly impactful for me, and here we are. It's all about getting organised. So first on the list is movement trays. Movement trays can divide opinion, but the reality is they are incredibly useful, especially when you're running lots of models. As you can see, when we start to magnetize the movement trays, they fit nicely in these really useful boxes, or if you don't like the aesthetic of these boxes, there are plenty of alternative fancy cases that you can get. Essentially, plop the models on the tray, pop the tray into the case, and you are good to go. It takes seconds to set stuff up. When I first started playing Horde armies, it got really soul destroying just getting the models out of the case. Moved away from the foam cases laying stuff down, and this has just been a massive game changer. It allows me to set up my army in seconds, like maybe a minute, just getting everything out of the box. You just open the box, boom, the models are out. So movement trays are fantastic, and then moving them around the board, I can just move the movement trays around instead of a whole unit. There's a misconception about movement trays where they just get in the way, and yes, they can do on certain bits of terrain, but for the most part, you should be able to put your movement trays down and move around. But the moment they look like they might get in the way, then you just take them off, and that's it, and just move on. And then you've got your movement tray there ready to then start your dead pile as you start to lose models as well, which is again is another efficient way of doing it. You don't just pile your models up in the corner of the board and lose track of what unit's what. As part of my movement tray system, what I do as well when I play a lot of different units is I paint the movement trays and I paint the rims of the bases to match the movement trays, so people can see at a glance the black unit or the red unit, so it's really clear, and you're not having discussions about, okay, what unit's that one in? Is that one in that unit? It's like, no, that's that color-coded unit. Nice and simple. So movement trays, magnetized movement trays, color coding, that helps with understanding what is what, and a really big win when you're playing Horde armies. And even if you're not playing necessarily like a proper Horde army, even if you've got a few units but 10 models in each of those units, actually having them set up on movement trays, you can still save that time even when you're playing a smaller model count army. It applies in just the same way, and then you have less time spent setting up, moving stuff around, and you can just get on with the important parts of the game. Other things you can do is organise your dice. A common thing that I see is people will have 10 dice set up in front of them that they know is 10 dice. So then when you have to count, okay, you got to roll 5 dice, you can just pick up half the dice in that pile. And it makes the process of picking up and counting dice ad infinitum a lot easier. You've got your little bundle of 10 dice. And then what I do is I take that another step further, is I have these buckets of dice, so that if I'm in a situation, Gene Stealer Cults is particularly great for this, a lot of random shots with demolition charges, and got to roll the random shots, count them, and work out what's what. Okay, I've got 24 shots. I then don't have to count out 24 dice. I just go, right, okay, pick up a dice cup, that's got 20 in it, add another 4 to it, boom, there we go. And as you can see from the little video here, the difference in picking up 20 dice versus just rolling your cup O20 is massive. If you multiply that time saving over 5 battle rounds, it all adds up, and it makes the game go at a pace that is much more pleasing for both yourself and your opponent, and means you're not just spending so much time counting out dice, as they're the things that can get a little bit laborious, whether or not you're playing a Horde army, but just maybe you've got a shooting army where you've got just a lot of shots, and you've just got to kind of go through the counting and the counting, and your opponent's going to sit there and just mentally switch off because you're just counting dice the whole time, and then, right, okay, as that unit shot, right, do this, that, how many dice do I need now, what's going on here? It's dull. Like, there's no two ways about it. Standing there watching our opponents count dice endlessly that's boring, right? So I really like the cup system to just, right, how many shots have I got? 30 shots. Right, boom, I've rolled 30 dice. Haven't even thought about it, it's just there. It's really useful. And another thing in the organisation part of things is data cards, or a little cheat sheet. If you don't want to spend money on the data cards, which I fully understand why you wouldn't want to do that, then print them out. If you've got the PDF codex, or you've got a physical codex and you've got access to a printer or a photocopier or your local library, print out the bits that you actually need in your games for the units that you're using. Some armies might only actually use a handful of data sheets, and you could print those off on a bit of A4 paper that you could just pick up and reference. It's really, really useful just to have one sheet of A4 that you can pick up and it's got your army at a glance, to save you from scrolling through a codex, PDF, or the app on your phone to find that one little rule that's been questioned during the game. You can just pick up the sheet of paper and go, right, okay, that unit there's the answer. Nice and simple. Another little thing that adds a shortcut to your gameplay. And my next tip is a chess clock. This is a very polarizing thing to say on the internet, is we should have a chess clock when we're playing 40k. There is still a very large, very loud part of the 40k community that are vehemently against chess clocks in game. Really, really anti them. And for the life of me, I cannot get on board with why that is. Chess clocks are fair. They encourage an equal amount of playing time. Even in casual settings, they can be really, really useful as a tool to help the game not run away with itself. Let's get 2 or 3 games in our afternoon that we've got to play 40k together. Let's use a chess clock, because if we play to the chess clock, then maybe the first game we're a little bit behind, but that kind of warms us up to then play another game afterwards, and you get to get some more games in. And the big thing about the chess clock is not only does it help make sure things are fair, where the time is divided up equally so that no players are getting any sort of advantage or disadvantage, but it also helps to make us better players. It encourages us to play in a timely manner, proactive with our decision making. Times I see players struck by analysis paralysis, and that is a really big factor in where players can sometimes struggle to get games in. They're looking at a scenario and there's multiple objectives that they can go to. They've only got a handful of units left. It's the middle of the game. They've got tactical cards which now say they need to go and kill stuff as well as hold those objectives. So where do they put the units to be able to achieve all of these things whilst also defending against what the opponent might do? And oh, by the way, we've only got half an hour left. That's intense, right? Whether it's a tournament setting and that's half an hour on the round and that's all the time we've got left for both players to get through the rest of the game, or it's a casual setting and you've just got half an hour before you need to go home. That can put us in a situation where we just think, oh crikey, what the hell do I do? And particularly in casual environments, that's why I love the chess clock, because it forces us to act. The chess clock doesn't care about our feelings, and it just says make a play, make a decision. And if we're trying to improve, this is really, really quite a powerful thing, because simply the act of doing something gives us a learning point. Either the thing that we did will be good or it will be bad, but either way it will give us something for us to reflect and learn from. When we start to use chess clocks, if it's something you're kind of thinking about adopting in your games and you want to use them in your games, maybe in the first instance it can feel bad if you're running out of time and that pressure. Once you can, like anything, practice with it, you're not worrying about it, you're not really thinking about the time, and you're able just to make the decisions without the time pressure. You're aware of the fact that you've got to do it in a timely fashion because you've practiced and you're used to the time being a factor now suddenly, and you think, okay, I'm now aware of it, so now I'm going to make a more concerted effort to play a little bit more briskly. So it's a really positive thing over a game to play to an agreed time, particularly in casual settings. It's not something you necessarily need to live or die by, but it's a great way of identifying if you are playing slowly and you can think, okay, I've used a lot of time. Maybe you went through your deployment really quickly, but then as the game got a bit more complicated in later turns, you used a lot of time trying to figure out one of your movement phases, and that's a really good reflection point as well. So the chess clock is, again, a really useful tool to help with that, and something that only ever encourages you and helps you to be able to identify slow parts of your game so that you can then address those, which you might not have been able to identify without that bit of a spotlight being shined on it through the help of a chess clock. So it is something that I always encourage people to use in their games, as in the long run it simply makes us better players. And this stigma of chess clocks only being necessary for competitive play or try-hards, win-at-all-cost players, it's just a load of hogwash. And actually you can get some really fun narrative elements involved if you're using a chess clock in casual games. You could use the chess clock to represent a ticking time bomb, or maybe you've got to get to an evac point before the time runs out, or you get stranded on a planet. You can weave it into the narrative and make it really fun. If you're having to rush through your turns because you've got to get off world before an orbital bombardment, or you're going to run out of time before an ambush arrives or something, then it's going to make for a really fun game and some crazy things happening. So I encourage anyone who hasn't used the chess clock in their games to open their minds a little bit and try it out. You may well be surprised. All of these ideas are very useful on their own, but hopefully you've spotted a theme here, and that is to understand what is slowing down a game for you. and to take specific action to help rectify that. This self-reflection and the ability to spot trends in your preparation and games is critical to improving at 40k, and more importantly, having enjoyable games for both you and your opponent. Which is why I made this video, where I discuss the importance of critical thinking and a reflective mindset. I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching. Keep rolling those dice and stay tuned for more.